Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I am speaking with Timothy Caulfield. He's a best-selling author, a health policy expert, and a professor and research director at the University of Alberta. I've been following him for a while on social media. Tim, it's so good to see you. Tim or Timothy?
I usually go Timothy, but whatever works
Nope,
for
then
you.
it's Timothy because, I get it. I have to take off my glasses for a second because it's so steamy outside that we're all fogging up here. But, you know, that's like when people say Tamara, Tamara. It's like, I always say I don't care, but I do care.
Well, I can hear my mom saying it's Timothy. It's Timothy whenever someone called me Tim.
Then it is Timothy, 100%.
And I have a Michael. And so I'm doing no, it's not Mike, it's Michael.
Right.
So
there you go. There you go. It's so good to see you because, I mean, you seem to be everywhere right now, at least in my social media feed, because there's so much, you've been really outspoken during the pandemic, and really helping people navigate what's real and what's not real. Is it your mission to sort of set everyone straight with information?
I'm not sure if it's my mission. I will say it's a passion. It's sort of it's been a long-standing passion of mine. If you know my work, you know that I've been fascinated in the spread of misinformation and the way that science is twisted in pop culture for a very long time. And then all of a sudden we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So sort of my passion and the work that my wonderful interdisciplinary research colleagues do, it all came together, right? It all came together. And so it really has been an incredible 15, 16 months. It really has been absolutely insane. And we've been very fortunate to have also a number of grants looking at misinformation in the context of COVID. I've been very fortunate to work with colleagues across Canada, you know, battling misinformation. So yeah, it's been a pretty insane year, but also kind of a heartbreaking year when you see the impact that misinformation is having. You know, the tangible impact that misinformation is having on people's lives, and it's both heartbreaking and incredibly frustrating.
I totally agree with you. And I mean, I've even seen it in my own family, right? I think many of us have, where there's these arguments about what is science, what isn't science, where are you getting this from? Because information is everywhere now. We can pick up our phone and, you know, get an article on whatever it is we want to get an article on, right? Is that what we do? Do we look for what we want to hear?
Yeah, this is definitely a big part of the story. You know, I call it the chaotic information environment. And it really is chaotic right now. And of course, social media plays a big role here. And there's good empirical evidence to back that up, that this is largely a social media phenomenon, because people are being bombarded with all these different kinds of studies and reports and authoritative voices. I'll give you an example. Today that happened right before we started chatting. There's this long thread on one of my social media feeds about hydroxychloroquine and how it's effective. Can you believe that people are still talking about hydroxychloroquine? You know, we have a large body of evidence telling us that it's not effective. We have, you know, people who have responsibly aggregated the science on hydroxychloroquine who have told us it's not effective. But people are still going out there and they're doing exactly what you just said. They're cherry picking the data, finding that one study, that one opinion that backs them up, and then they throw it in your face and say, "See," and it's just sigh. It's an incredibly frustrating phenomenon. But before I continue, I always like to lead with a little bit of good news. I guess I haven't led with this, but let's lead with the good news. You know,
yes.
The good news is most Canadians have been awesome, right? They have been awesome. You know, you're looking at population, you know, nationally, over 80% of people enthusiastic about the vaccine. Alberta could do better. You know, Alberta is not at the forefront of that. Most people have embraced masks, despite you hearing about all these anti-masks. You know, that's sort of a real behavior change miracle. You know, we went from, you know, a year ago, uncertainty about the value of masks, and then with like in 8 months, I can't remember the acceptance rate, at one point it was over 90%. So, you know, there's a lot of good news stories out there that I think we overlook because of the frustration with the those who are hesitant, those who are pushing the misinformation. But that frustration is deserved because that misinformation is doing real harm.
What I've found is that you can't argue with people who think the complete opposite of you when it comes to the pandemic and information that they believe. I'm telling you this from firsthand experience, and I know
that too.
And it's just, even if I'm vaccinated, my family's vaccinated. We've only all had our first vaccine here in BC. We'll be getting our second ones in the next few weeks. I have family members that refuse to get vaccinated. So it becomes like I'm concerned for their safety and, my children's safety, right? But it's so odd to me that we are in this crisis. It is like there are millions of people dying from this, yet there are still people who don't think it's real or just think it's the flu. I can't wrap my head around it. I've interviewed so many people about this and I still can't understand it.
It's stunning, right? It's absolutely stunning. I think it shows the power of our cognitive biases, the power of our, ideological points of view, our worldview, that power, and the power of social media and misinformation. I agree with you. It really is stunning that people, look around. Look around. Yeah. Number one, you'll see the incredible tangible impact that the pandemic has had on people's lives. I'm sure people that have gotten sick or died as a result of COVID. I do, tragically. I've seen the impact that COVID has had on people's lives. So, you see it. And then number two, witness the incredible impact of the vaccines. Like, we can see it. It's, tangible in our lives. And of course, we have this mountain of incredibly empirical and incredible empirical evidence that demonstrates both the safety and efficacy. And we're not talking about, people's, it's only got an experimental pass by the regulators. Look, the data we have now is absolutely, we're talking mountains of data on efficacy and safety. And the other important thing is, as you know well, it's monitored incredibly closely. People will talk about these incredibly rare side effects. Well, that's a celebration of how incredible our surveillance mechanisms are, that we can pick up these very, very rare possible adverse events associated with the vaccine. So this is like a scientific miracle.
Well,
the word miracle
100%.
Same word, but it really is. We would have been happy. I've been studying vaccines for a long time, and I worked with a lot of virologists and et cetera. And we would have been probably happy with a vaccine that was 60, 70% effective, right? And we have like several that are over 90% effective at keeping people out of the hospital, et cetera. This is really a sign. It's a moon landing, as I always like to say. And despite all that, misinformation for a sector of the population wins. I do want to say, comment on something that you said earlier. I always tell people don't waste your time arguing with hardcore deniers, right?
But what if it's somebody in your family that you are close with? You can't help it.
Yeah, I think you still, so I was going to say you still should have those conversations, right? If it's someone close to you. By hardcore deniers, I mean, someone on my feed or don't give them oxygen. Don't waste your time. But if it's someone in your family, I think it is important to have these conversations and recognize that no one changes their mind right in front of you. That never happens, right? No one goes, now that you mention it, you're right. That never happens, right? Have those conversations. And I always like to say, give people a path towards credible information. They may not change their mind today or tomorrow, but perhaps in the future. And the other thing, of course, these are important conversations for your broader family, right? So, it's an opportunity to talk about what the science really says. So I still think it's worth having those conversations, and it's really important to listen and do it in a constructive manner, but don't allow yourself to get pulled into the vortex of denial.
And you can get pulled in, online. And okay, let me ask you this. So I had a conversation the other day with a family member. It was texting, so that's not really a conversation, but you can see where this is going. And it was about the vaccine, and they were saying to me that, it's not even FDA approved, it's just an experiment and all that. And I said, well, that's, we are an emergency. I said all the science, I went through it all. And then they said to me, the side effects for this are horrible. They're not even telling everybody what it is. They're hiding things from you. There have been hundreds of thousands of side effects and blah, blah, blah. And I said, every drug comes with side effects. And I said, all I can relate it to is I was on a chemo drug for 3 years. And the side effects were listed in this tiny little package. It was so small, I had to have a magnifying glass. It was so long, the side effects. The first side effect was death. And I still took the drug because I was willing to risk the side effects so that I could come out on the other side of cancer and be cancer-free. And it worked. So doesn't every drug come with all the things that people are complaining about with this vaccine? Like we have a risk of side effects. We have a risk of this. We have a risk of still getting the virus because no drug is perfect, is it?
You're 100% correct about that. And this is actually one of the things I talk about in my new book. People are terrible. We all are. You are. I am. We all are terrible at doing sort of the risk-benefit assessment. We're just terrible at it, right? We're just not wired to do it as human beings. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. One, and this is a really good example of this, powerful anecdotes will overwhelm our critical thinking. And so people are seeing these headlines or they're getting, social media messages about an individual that, true or not, that had an adverse effect to the vaccines. And that story will overwhelm hundreds of millions of data points that we have about efficacy and safety. That one story will overwhelm it. So we have that going on, right? And the other thing is we have, as you know, we have this negativity bias that if it's bad news, it's more likely to have an impact on us. And some people have argued that we're evolutionarily wired that way because, it's better to remember the bad stuff, right? Tigers hang out over there, don't eat that plant, so that's backfiring now in this modern era. But the other point that you make, I think, is so important about drugs is, everything in life has a risk-benefit ratio. Hop in your car, drive to the grocery store. There's a risk-benefit analysis going on there, right? Letting your kids walk to school or not. In my book, I use that as a really good example of how our risk-benefit ratio is totally out of whack. But one of the things I find so fascinating about the vaccines, exactly as you described it, is how people don't do this same kind of analysis with other drugs that they take in their life. Do they do this same kind of shopping for their antibiotic and this weighing of the risk benefits? On the contrary, sometimes they complain that they don't get them, right? Do they do this same kind of risk benefit analysis with all the supplements that they take? The supplement industry, this huge multi-billion-dollar industry, profit-driven industry that's largely unregulated, that research tells us that they're often contaminated, that there's these adverse effects. One of the number one reasons for severe liver damage in ERs is people taking supplements, right? So, and one of the great ironies is the exact same people that are complaining about the vaccines are often the same cohort of individuals that take a whole bunch of natural supplements, right? So you have all of these strange kinds of conceptually inconsistent ideas out there, and that really demonstrates the degree to which this is really about ideology. This is really about personal branding. This is really about the clustering of beliefs. And if I may, I'm going on a little long. But
this is so good, Timothy. Seriously, this is like
you made another really important point, and that is about the language that you've heard in your text message, right? This idea that it's experimental, that it's that has all the side. They are using the language that has been put in play by the anti-vax community, and there's this really interesting research that talks about how that language, it's experimental, it doesn't really have FDA approval. The research was too fast. Those are all doubt points that were created by the anti-vax community and kind of put in play in pop culture, and unfortunately it worked. So they're just aping the talking points that the anti-vax community has used for a long time with HPV, you name it, right? They've used the same points in the infertility scare. That's another really good example, right? These are talking points that the anti-vax community knows gets traction and knows will forward their agenda.
I totally feel that and know it from just my own experience. Even when, you talk about the HPV vaccine, right? I have 2 girls. Never crossed my mind that I wouldn't get it until I started hearing other mothers say, oh, well, I know that they can get really sick from this, and why would I want to do this? And so I asked 3 friends of mine who are doctors about it, and they looked at me and they said, it's a cure for a certain type of cancer, and you're not going to give it to your daughter? And once they said that, I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's amazing. It is absolutely. I have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. All of them have the HPV.
I have a son. He also got it too. Yes.
And it is, I didn't even hesitate, right? The thing about vaccines also, we were talking about risk-benefit ratio.
Yes.
The risk-benefit ratio is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. We were talking about antibiotics and driving your car. It's unbelievable. So even though we are always talking about that yes, there are risks associated with everything, the risk-benefit ratio with vaccines is off the chart. You could make this sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. Vaccines. You can make a real compelling argument that vaccines are the single greatest achievement of biomedicine, given the risk-benefit ratio. They save millions of lives every single year, mostly kids, by the way, mostly kids. And the other important thing about vaccines, and I think this is a really important message, I know where, you know all this, but I think it's worth emphasizing, is this pro-social nature to it. People on my feed, and I hear it, daily, why would I get it? I'm a young, healthy person. Getting vaccinated is an act of altruism. You're doing it for your community, you're doing it for your loved ones, it's beneficial for you too, but really at its core, getting vaccinated is this altruistic act you do for your community.
Well, it's really shown me who the narcissists are. That's who it's like, the people that only care about themselves. Because, I'm very involved in the, in the Down syndrome community. My son has Down syndrome. I know that if my son gets, COVID, it will not be good. We know what the science shows about people with Down syndrome and COVID. So it's very important to me that my son is protected. And he couldn't get the vaccine. He's 13 until they opened it up. But, I really appreciate you saying that, because you're saying things that I've thought, but it's so easy for someone like me, who's not an expert like you, to be swayed the other way and question my own logical thinking. And that's what I find scary. So let's talk about, is there fatigue with people and making decisions? We've had to make so many decisions in the last little while about work, working from home, vaccines, how we get mass, this, that, information overload. Are we just exhausted from all of this now?
I think we are. I really think we are. And in fact, one of my, I'm thinking about writing a piece on this, about ignoring the noise, right? I do think we're exhausted, and there is a pretty robust body of evidence that talks about how decision fatigue can make a difference. It can make a difference on long term like you just described, but also day to day. There's all this really interesting research about you don't want to be in front of a judge at the end of the day or before a coffee break. They've made all the or someone who's making decisions about your investments. All this really interesting research around that, but it impacts our day-to-day decisions on a personal level too, right? And I think that does happen. There's this really interesting research that's one of the as someone who studies this area, one of the things that the pandemic did bring is it brought me a whole bunch more data. Right? So the silver lining. There's been all this fantastic research around this exact topic and around misinformation, around decision making, and the impact of misinformation. But there's been this really interesting research that has shown how social media, being bombarded with all this information, can make it more difficult for us to tease out what's real and what's not real. If you get your information from social media, you're more likely to believe misinformation, more likely to share misinformation. But there's also, again, the good news is there's also this fascinating research that talks about if we can just nudge ourselves to pause, right? Just to pause, just to reflect for a moment, we're less likely to believe misinformation, less likely to share it. And of course, social media is such a frantic information space, right? It doesn't really invite reflection. So if you can just remind yourself to kind of pause, to take that beat, it can make a difference. And this sounds kind of new agey coming from from me, this hard.
No, but
actually pretty robust evidence to back it up. And one of my colleagues, Gordon Pennycook, he's an experimental psychologist. He's done work on this. His work has been replicated by other laboratories. This really can make a difference. If you can just remind yourself to pause. Because look, most Canadians, they want to be accurate. They don't have a nefarious agenda to spread misinformation. They want to be accurate. So just reminding yourself to pause. And the other thing, I think it is important to take a break from the noise. I think that can help you both, from a stress level, from an anxiety level, but also from a critical thinking level. Allows you to sort of re-enter the conversation from a calmer, more reflective place. And I think that does matter. And again, a little bit of evidence to back that up. I try to walk the walk. I try to get off social media.
I know.
For moments during the day, and then at night, I really do try to do that. It can be hard, though. It can be hard. It
is hard. And, I always went to, let's talk about social media for a second and influencers, because what I found is, I started going on Instagram because I like to look at interior design and food and kids and keep up with my friends and, post pictures, and it's all great. All of a sudden, I found that, people that I followed were giving health advice in this pandemic and, telling me to take more vitamin D and, we have a mental health crisis on our hands now because of this pandemic. We've always had a mental health crisis on our hands, right? And all of these things, all of a sudden, I notice people, influencers, if you will, becoming quite outspoken about their idea of how we should all live in a pandemic. It's been a little bit alarming. Like, why are we taking health advice from influencers?
Well, we always have. We always have. But you're right. You're right. And again, as you probably know, this is something we follow really closely at our institute. But again, a pretty big body of evidence that talks about the impact that celebrities, prominent individuals, influencers have on public discourse. And there's been studies that have highlighted how prominent individuals, let's call them that, as the umbrella term, have shaped how we believe, talk about the pandemic, have given life to and oxygen to conspiracy theories. Woody Harrelson pushing the 5G conspiracy theory, for example, and have been marketing unproven ideas. Gwyneth Paltrow and all of her long COVID recommendations, no evidence to support any of it. And one of my favorite athletes, Tom Brady, pushing supplements to boost your immune system. Yeah, that's all out there. And it is sort of a fascinating phenomenon because, if we went outside and we interviewed 1,000 people, most people would say they know these people aren't credible sources of information. In fact, there have been studies on this, and it's in the single digits, right? But despite that, we know they have an influence on us. And I think that's because they have the megaphone, right? So they play to our cognitive bias, availability bias. We're just going to remember things that celebrities say. Number two, they're often, a powerful anecdote. And as I said earlier, we know that anecdotes, narrative stories can be very persuasive. And so, if it works for Tom Brady, it's, he's the greatest quarterback of all time. He is, by the way. It'll work for me too, right? And Gwyneth Paltrow, when she was talking about long COVID, which she says she has, and if she does, Gwyneth, I don't wish that on anyone. I hope you get better soon. But all of a sudden it becomes an anecdote, right? It worked for Gwyneth. Maybe this is what I should do. So we know that even though people don't view them as credible voices, they have an impact. And of course, there was a great study in the United States. Well, I don't know if great's the right term, but found that 37% at one time, over 37% of all the misinformation circulating about COVID had some connection to the former President Trump, right? It really highlights how one prominent individual can shape the narrative. And there was a study from Oxford that showed that 20% of all the misinformation circulating about COVID had some connection to a prominent individual, which is a pretty big percentage to begin with. But they also found that 69% of what we share on social media is us sharing the message from the prominent individual. You follow that? So it's a top-down, bottom-up phenomenon. And it's good to know this, right? Because it highlights how important it is to debunk this stuff, even if it sounds absurd and even if it comes from, your favorite celebrity.
I just feel like if you're already down the rabbit hole of misinformation and you believe it, it's pretty hard. Isn't it hard to pull yourself out of that?
It is. It is. And there's, again, lots of really interesting research around that. So that's one of the reasons I think, one of the things I've always advocated for. And by the way, this is an interesting conversation that people are having in the science communication strategy. When is the best time to start debunking something? But I've always been one who's advocated sort of for earlier is better, because you want to debunk something, correct the misinformation before it takes on sort of an ideological valence, right? Before it becomes part of that package of beliefs that you're supposed to adopt if you're part of this community. I mean, think about hydroxychloroquine. Who would have believed that this would be an ideological flag, but it's become an ideological flag, right? So, or 5G technology, right? Get to that bit of misinformation, debunk it quickly before it takes on this identity signaling component. And I don't think we do that enough. Although I think we're getting better at it. I will say this though. You always want to make sure that your countering of messages is aimed at the general public. There really is, that should be your target audience. It is very hard to change people who are conspiracy theorists' mind. In fact, there was an interesting study that came out, I'm going to say 6 weeks ago, that found that those conspiracy theorists are less likely to change their worldview based on new evidence. No surprise. But what's interesting about that, there's an irony there, right? Because I get a lot of hate mail, and
I can only imagine.
Paragraph 2 of all the hate mail is, Tim, you got to open your mind to 5G and hydroxychloroquine. And of course, the irony is they're the ones that don't open their mind, right? Because they don't want any evidence to change how they see the world.
I actually feel a little bit better talking to you about this, because I've been in these arguments, right? And I understand, I've had the same thing said back to me, and I'm talking about, people in my family and stuff like that, and people who are close to me, and it's quite frustrating. So listen, Timothy, one of the things that we like to do is thank our guests for spending time with us and sharing your expertise. So we ask our guests to pick a charity, a Canadian charity that they like, and you chose Right to Play Canada, which is a fantastic organization, and we will be giving them $500 in your name. So thank you so much for spending time with us and for choosing Right to Play Canada. So going back to this misconception and, health products and buying supplements and all of these things that we want to do because we just want to be better, right? We want to be healthier and happier and all of these things. And so all these ads go by on social media and that. How do I know that a health product that's being sold is not legitimate?
Okay, this is going to sound like, I'm going to start with a broad, not entirely accurate statement, but I think it's still a good rule of thumb. Assume it doesn't work. I once pitched a title for a book, and it was, nothing works. And my editor said, that's a little too pessimistic. But look, when it comes to lifestyle and trying to live a healthy life, we know broadly what it looks like. We really, really do, right? You don't smoke. If you smoke, almost nothing else matters, right? You exercise, and that means just move, do something you love. There's no magic there. You eat healthy. That sounds like a oversimplification, but it's not. Despite the incredible amount of noise about diet, we have a pretty good idea what a healthy diet looks like. And humans can eat a variety of things. It's, lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, healthy proteins. There really is no magic. Try to maintain a healthy weight. That's a tough one. And we all come in different shapes and sizes, and we can all be healthy in those different shapes and sizes. I think that's really important to note. You get a good night's sleep. You take those preventative steps. So you get vaccinated, you wear a seatbelt, right? And you surround yourself with people that you love, right? And that's about it. That's
groundbreaking news. This is like
everything else. Now, okay. Having said that, I think you watch for, and I'm going to be a hypocrite here. You watch for the hyperbole. Are they presenting something as a cure or horribly dangerous? If they do that, you should be susceptible because I mean suspicious because I promise you'll know if the data supports something. Ask yourself what kind of evidence is being used. Is this just anecdotal evidence? Is it just observational evidence? Always want to, especially something as complex as health, you always want to look to that body of evidence. It's never going to be one study. What's the body of evidence say in this space? That's one thing you want to do. Ask yourself, are they selling something? Are they selling a product, an ideology, a brand, right? Ask yourself if that's the case. It doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, but it might have an influence on what they're telling you. I think that's really, really important. And I'm going to go back. I've said this, I think, a bunch of times. Always look to, is this founded on a testimonial or just an assertion? We've done research on this ourselves. A lot of people think we just focus on, unproven alternative medicine and stuff. And in fact, most of the research we do at the Institute is more about conventional medicine, conventional science. And we did a study on the marketing of unproven stem cell therapies and found that, it's the core thing they use, testimonials, right? Always remember, wait for the body of evidence, wait for that body of evidence to emerge. And look, most things are not going to outperform, the list of items I said before when you're talking about living a healthy lifestyle, right? So I think that is really, really important.
Why do you think that, are we in a time where people don't trust doctors, or they don't think that scientists are, I feel that a bit Tamara, there is a cure for cancer. They have the medicine to cure it, but they're not doing it because it's a billion dollar business. And I'm like, I know a lot of doctors and oncologists just from my own health experience, and none of them got into the job to watch people die.
Yeah, I hear that one constantly, right? The big pharma thing. And that's a very interesting story because big pharma, they have been bad actors, right? There are conflict of interest issues. And this is actually something that we study at the Institute, the impact of commercialization pressure on the research process. That is an issue, right? Absolutely is an issue. And so people that are trying to create doubt, right? They'll leverage those genuine concerns in order to push misinformation. And that can make it very sticky, right? It can make it very difficult to debunk because there are those issues that need to be addressed. I think we're getting a little better, that we still have a long way to go with respect to the impact of commercialization pressure on science. But those issues are there and need to be addressed. I wrote a piece not that long ago for a publication called Healthy Debate, it's for healthcare providers. And in that piece, it was kind of a personal piece. I don't usually do this, but it was kind of a personal piece where I talked about my bad experience with the healthcare system. And the reason I did this was because so many people say, "Oh, Caulfield, you're just in the pocket of big pharma. Oh, Caulfield, you science is your religion." I hear that all the time, and I say, on the contrary, my personal experience with the healthcare system has not been great. My mother was misdiagnosed; she had cancer, and they misdiagnosed it for 8 months, and it killed her. I had an uncle that died of an iatrogenic injury. I had another relative that died as a result of diagnostic cascade. I absolutely, in my own personal experiences with physicians, has not been great. So I totally get it. But the problems of the healthcare system are not going to be solved by the embrace of misinformation, the embrace of unproven therapies, the embrace of bunk. We've got to make everything better. We've got to listen, we've got to be compassionate, and we've got to try to make everything better.
Yeah, I totally agree. So going back to your book, the book is called Relax, Damn It. I love it. Tell me, for anybody listening who wants to, improve their lives and protect themselves against, information overload and getting poor information, what do you recommend they do?
Well, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, already. And the gimmick of the book is, as you know, is it takes place over a typical day and all the decisions that we make throughout the day. And I base the topics that I picked in there. I'm very fortunate. I get to give a lot of public lectures, and I've heard people ask questions about these topics. So that's one of the things I use to pick the topic, and also just stuff I was interested in. The decisions that I I struggle with. So, everything from when to wake up to how much coffee to drink, sort of some frivolous topics like toilet seat up, toilet seat down. But I use all of those topics as an excuse to look at what the data actually says, but also the bigger kind of story, the more grand ambition is to explore all those cultural and social forces that shape the way we see the world and the decisions that we make. And hopefully, framing it as a typical day makes it relatable to people, right? And we recognize that it impacts me, it impacts you, it impacts everyone. And I hope it gives people the tools to cut through the noise. And we've talked about some of those already, the idea of always asking yourself what kind of evidence is being used. Always remind yourself to think big picture, right? And go back to those big truths that we know. Vaccines work. We know what a healthy lifestyle looks like. Always sort of step back from the noise. So those are just some of the tools that I recommend. Of course, there's more in the book. But I also hope, again, big picture, it invites people to reflect on all these social forces that kind of stress us out about decisions, increase our anxiety. And I hope that people kind of find it liberating.
Yeah, I do too. I really do. I think that this conversation has been great, Timothy, because it really sort of reminds us that, there's always going to be a ton of information, right? And it's just so different now because we have it at our fingertips and we can find anything we want any time of the day. We can get online and have a conversation with somebody about the things that we each believe in that may or may not be true. So it's a different time. And I really look at our kids, right? And think about what they're absorbing, what they're seeing, what they're hearing from their parents at home and coming to school and saying, right? So it is a very interesting time. And it's sometimes hard to find your way through all the noise. It really is.
It is an incredible time. And I actually think that this is, dealing with misinformation, dealing with the chaotic information environment is one of the challenges of our time. And I think it's something that we're not going to solve. I don't know if solve is the right word tomorrow or the next day. I think this is a struggle that we're going to have for decades to come. And it's just going to get more and more complex. But the good news, always nice to have good news, right? I think the good news is there's a greater proportion of, entities that recognize this, from the World Health Organization to, national governments recognizing the impact of misinformation in the chaotic information environment. We have more and more data. But perhaps the best thing is there's this wonderful team of individuals emerging throughout the world. These science communicators, these clinicians, these researchers who are passionate about this topic. They're getting on social media. They're doing fun videos on TikTok. I think it's a good news story to see these voices rise up, these diverse voices, which is also really, really important, rise up and become a big part of the solution.
I love it. Timothy, thank you so much. I love this conversation. Your book is called Relax, Damn It. It's available wherever you buy books. You can order it. You can get it on your device and read it there. You can also follow Timothy on Twitter. He's at Caulfield Tim and at Caulfield Tim on Instagram. That's where I like to follow you. I'm a visual person. I love your Instagram feed. I really, truly do. So I encourage everybody to go there and check it out. And I really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation. So thank you, Timothy.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.